So, I guess you've heard about Bigfoot. If you know anything about Bigfoot, you know about the Patterson Gimlin film. To get right to the point, this old gem from the 60s is one of two things, a hoax or a Sasquatch. Here's why it's probably a hoax. It's genuine. A genuine hoax, that is. This is literally one of the greatest hoaxes going. It's the crown jewel of its kind after all these years, precisely because it looks like a big hairy man walking around in the woods. The term guy in an ape suit does not describe this image. This is definitely not an ape suit. I don't want to bore you with a big essay about it, but this figure is not wearing any kind of ape suit in the classical sense. That's most definitely a furry man costume. That's a Sasquatch costume, not an ape suit. It may even seem like a minor nitpick, but it's part of the important distinction between a gag or a scheme or a practical joke. A genuine hoax is more serious business. This film gets mixed up with a lot of gags, schemes, and practical jokes as the years roll on, but this is a genuine hoax precisely because it's so convincing. Okay, I've laid my cards on the table. I said it's convincing. I suppose there are a lot of folks out there who would argue that this figure is obviously wearing some kind of get-up and that's all there is to it. And if any of you are thinking that, you're going to love reason number 2 why this film is a hoax. There is something very strange happening right here where the leg meets the buttocks. This gives me the impression of a diaper. It's very fixed and rigid right here. It seems unnatural, but for some kind of costume. Further down the leg, we get to number 3. There is something happening here. This seems like a weird anomaly in a leg, and some guy claiming he's the fellow we're looking at here said something about wearing thigh-high galoshes as part of this ape suit he supposedly wore. Now, I don't know what to make of this guy. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole, but if I were to suggest what's going on in this area here of the figure, I'd have to agree it looks like what he said. I hate looking at this because this convinces me that it's a costume of some kind. Of course, I'm no anatomy expert, but I know a little about trying to draw folds in clothes and things like that, and these look like folding patterns to me. Naked, muscle-bound animals don't exhibit whatever seems to be going on here. And that pretty much cinches it. That's damning evidence in my opinion, and believe me, I don't like it. I just call them as I see them. However, one could argue that this is a minor misinterpretation when compared to the mountain of reasons this might be a Sasquatch. But before we get to that, one more very important reason that this is a hoax. Reason number 4, this is a hoax, is that Patterson was invested in the legend of Bigfoot before the film existed. He authored books about Bigfoot which featured his own drawings of Bigfoot. Heck, Gimlin's been confirming for years that he and Patterson went out in the woods looking for Bigfoot. If only it were so easy. Perhaps there's only one way to film a Bigfoot. Dress a guy up and point a camera at him. Well, whoever these fellas were who dressed somebody up and pointed a camera at him, they sure did a bang-up job, because here's why this might be a Sasquatch. Reason number 1 is the stabilized versions we're looking at right here. This wasn't how the film looked for the first 30 years of its existence. The original film is a more dizzying affair. For many years it made sense to laugh the whole thing off. It may as well have been out of focus. The only thing laughable about the stabilized versions is that we can see that this thing looks like a big hairy naked person in the woods. We're not laughing at a guy in some ape suit acting like a baboon. And this is the number 2 reason this might be a Sasquatch. The figure's mobility is striking. You'd think this fellow walked around in the woods in a Bigfoot get-up every morning after breakfast. How can this guy even see where he's going while he's wearing all this stuff on his head and shoulders? The figure also seems to cover a lot of ground, but it doesn't exhibit the bouncing motion one might expect from the average person trying to cover a lot of ground. The infamous glance back at Patterson and hardly a misstep. Out in the woods taking these big stomping steps, while the torso stays so fixed but for the flailing arms until the whole upper portion of this figure appears to contort not unlike a naked animal's flesh for a look at the cameraman. The figure appears to be simply walking along, but people don't walk like this. There's no shortage of arguments for this declaration. If you know anything about this film, you've heard this. I'd really like to know if people out there, if you, for example, were to mimic the Patterson film, would you find it surprisingly difficult to walk that way? Can you walk like that and look nonchalant like this? There's a lot of stuff out there about this already. The consensus is that this ain't a human body to begin with, so of course the gait is odd. So the two possibilities are, the guy in the costume walks really weird, or we're looking at a Sasquatch. And this brings us to the number 3 reason this might be a Sasquatch. There is a consensus that this ain't even a human in a naked, hairy human costume. The arguments are out there, folks. I tend to agree. This has to be one of 2 things. Either the costume is quite complicated, or what appears to be a tight-fitting, flexible suit is covering a burly and confounding person. Perhaps it was just a weird person who walked weird and put on a weird costume in the woods so Roger Patterson could wave a camera at him. Perhaps it's a glimpse of the legendary Sasquatch in the flesh. Well, that's the gist of my big Bigfoot video. I think anyone who's not impressed by the film is just being stubborn. But I also think it could be a really good Bigfoot costume, a well-orchestrated hoax, if you will. I don't use the word hoax lightly. Ever since these stabilized videos showed up on the internet, I saw the film as pure gold. The idea that some cowboys whipped up a diabolically convincing Bigfoot film in the late 1960s only begs more interesting questions and is no less fascinating than the whole legend of Bigfoot in itself, in my opinion. But I'll not go on and on about it. If you want more information and opinions about the whole thing, you can look into it yourself. I just wanted to have my say about it floating around out there.